Okay, hey everyone, welcome. My name is John Park with the Utah League of Cities and Towns. Thank you for joining us today for our town hall. I think this is the 11th month straight we've done a COVID-related town hall meeting, at least one a month, and so we've been busy with our town hall, both dealing with the COVID, a lot of issues dealing with COVID and the economic outlook of the state of Utah. So I would like to welcome you all and joining us today. We have some very special guests that we'll get to in a few minutes. Rich Lakin, Immunization Director of the Utah Department of Health, as well as Kelvyn Cullimore, President and CEO of BioUtah, and Dana Malick from the Deputy Vice President with PhRma. Before we get that, I would just like to give you a quick reminder that next week officially convenes our state legislature session. And like everything else in COVID, it's not going to be a typical session. They've got all kinds of different rules, and we think that in a lot of ways that has changed many of the tried and true ability for us as league and as members of the league to properly communicate with our legislators in a timely manner. With that said, it's more important than ever for you, our members, to be available to help in this communication effort. And so we'd like you to do two things. First of all, make sure you know who your local legislator is, both your representative and senator, and how to contact them. And second, make sure you're signed up for the daily legislative updates. I've asked the Utah League of Cities and Towns Communication Director, Susan Wood, to just take a minute and quickly let you know how to make sure you're signed up for our daily legislative updates. Susan?
Well, there are some easy ways to do it. At the bottom of the emails that you may be receiving from us, from the league, it says change your preferences, or at the very bottom of the page. You can click on that. That's an easy way to get into your personal subscription. Or you can get on our website and do it that way. And Nick is the little ULCT logo there, who's sharing our website screen. And you can see under Member Services up at the top, if the drop down shows subscribe to receive ULCT emails. If you click on that, and you can read the paragraph there, it says click here to subscribe. Once you click there, you can choose whether you want to receive texts, which we'll use during the legislative session, and or emails. For example, in this case, we're going to go with emails, and you can see where the text message option exists. And you type in your email address right underneath. If it's a text message you'd like to receive, you type in your telephone number and submit. You'll also, at that point, you'll have the option to pick which topic that the league provides information on typically that you want to receive information about. So have at it. It's super easy, and we want to get the information to you that you are seeking. So there you go. Those are some examples of the topics. John?
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Susan. Thanks, Nick, for helping us boomers through that kind of issue. Anyway, so let's start today by, we've had Rich on before. Rich Lakin is the Immunization Director, the Utah Department of Health, Bureau of Epidemiology, and it'll take about 10 to 15 minutes to talk about where we are with the vaccine program in the state of Utah. And Rich, I know you must be the busiest guy in the state right now, so thank you so much for taking the time to address us today.
You bet. Thank you. I'm just going to start sharing my screen. You should be able to see it. Is that correct?
We can see it fine. Yeah.
Okay, great. So I first of all want to talk a little bit about vaccine supply and capacity and targets, and then I'll move into how the distribution is occurring within the state of Utah. So when you look at this, the main thing that you need to look at on this is this graph right here that shows blue is our supply, orange is our committed capacity, meaning that we have the capacity to administer more vaccine. However, we don't have enough vaccine. And this is going to occur, as far as I know, it's going to occur at least through the month of February. It just depends on whether Johnson & Johnson and AstraZeneca come on at some point. But for the Pfizer and the Mrna doses that we receive now, we do not have enough supply to supply everybody that would, that would want it at this point, just for the fact that that's why we haven't opened it up all to Utahns. And we've had to kind of be very strategic. States have actually been very strategic in how they are opening up the vaccine to these populations as we move through it. We have a number of partners on board. We have a number that are ready to help us once we have a higher supply, and we will move to that stage once we get there. Local health departments are actually exhausting the amount of vaccine they receive every week as we move through this. So let me talk a little bit about the phase 1 priority groups and kind of our timeline and how things have changed. Things are changing rather rapidly. Sometimes I'll get an email or have a discussion with CDC hours before we have to make some adjustments. And so the information I get from them is not coming in as quickly as we had hoped. But we rolled this out on hospital healthcare workers back on December 15th. And as you can see through the timeline of these priority groups, this was established as our priority groups, which is phase 1. And I'll talk about phase 2, how that has changed, and how things are going to change once we go into phase 2. Phase 1, you can see that our priority groups are hospital healthcare workers, local health department healthcare. That would be those that provide care or vaccinations to the community. Tribal healthcare, the same scenario. You can see those numbers are rather small, only 2,500 when it looks at the big picture here. Long-term care facility residents and staff. This area here, this area here is one of our top priorities, these long-term care facility residents and staff. We are seeing many hospitalizations with the staff and residents, and also deaths. A lot of them occur within these long-term care facilities. So this has been a very high priority. And let me tell you a little bit about how we accomplished this task. We're actually one of the leaders in the country in getting our long-term care facility staff their first dose and their scheduled dose. And how that works is there's a federal agreement with Walgreens and CVS, and this is across the whole country. And they receive our allocation so that they can assist to taking care of these long-term care facilities, staff and residents. When we put this together, we also contracted with Community Nursing Services, Hurricane Pharmacy, and Red Rock Pharmacy as other partners that could help us with these long-term care facilities. There were gaps in which Walgreens and CVS, either the long-term care facilities did not schedule with them, or they didn't want them. They wanted another option. And so we were able to provide them with 3 more options to ensure that we get these facilities done. And like I said, we're moving very fast on this. We started this on December 28th, and every long-term care resident and staff will receive their first vaccination at least by the 22nd. And you're talking, you can see that there's 55,000 doses there, or residents and staff that should receive a vaccine. So we're moving really well there. As our other priority group, we move into non-hospital healthcare. These are healthcare workers that are associated not with the hospitals. So this would be your private practice physicians, nurses, physical therapists, occupational therapists, dentists, dental assistants, a very broad category. You can see there's 92,655 that we have figured. We started that on December 28th also with that, and knowing that we may not have enough of doses, but we went ahead on January 4th and we've added essential protective services. That's our police, fire, EMS, et cetera. To that, we are starting this week. As many of you know, K through 12 educators and school staff have been added to that, and that's a very large number, and they're being vaccinated. We have also added 70 plus to this phase 1 priority group. So anybody over the age of 70 can make an appointment with their local health department and also get vaccinated. So that's our phase 1 priority groups, is 70 and above, these K through 12 educators and school staff, essential protective services, non-hospital healthcare workers, long-term care facility residents and staff, tribal health, local health department health, and all hospital healthcare workers. So that makes a big number. As you look at down here, we've got a 267,400 people, and it says 534,800 doses. That 534,800 doses is not going to be reached until late February. So we have, I have always mentioned that it's going to be vaccine will drive the response, and that is still the case. We do not have enough vaccine to open it up to everybody here to receive it within a week's time. Everybody is going to have to be patient, especially since we opened it up on the governor's directive that 70 plus also be added to this list. And they were really hitting those websites and calling their local health departments to get scheduled to receive vaccines. And appointments are made all the way through next week already at many of these local health departments. So we do not have the vaccine to meet the needs right now. And so people have to be patient. They'll have to keep checking back every week as we go through these groups. Just wanted to go talk about a few things, if I can find the right one here, about our priority groups. And actually, if you don't mind, I'm actually going to switch to a better screen. If I can find it, I apologize for this delay. But anyway, let me, while I'm trying to work through that, let me try to find the screen that I would like to show you, but I can't seem to find it right now. This is our phase 2, and I just ignore these populations right here, and where we're talking about mental health workers and risk levels, etc. We have changed what our priority populations are after the age of 70. First of all, the goal of the vaccination is to take care of those populations that are being impacted the most. And those populations that are being impacted the most are those over the age of 65. However, on the governor's directive, we decided to go 70 and above, even though now the federal government's kind of coming out with 65 and above. Reason being is because we just don't have enough vaccine. And we have to be careful about, as we go through these priority groups, how this vaccine is going to be rolled out. So I'm hoping you can see this new screen. And we've gone to an age-based system, not a priority list, because those that are most likely to be hospitalized, those that are mostly likely to die from COVID, our number one first is 70 years and above, and actually 65 and above. So you can see here in our phase 2 approach, we have 70 above, which we've moved into our phase 1. So that leaves 65 to 64. We have a number of tribal communities that receive vaccine from us, and they are a priority. Many of them get hospitalized and also die. We also have a lot of congregate living facilities that also need to be added in there. And then as you go through, we have all these different age groups that are broken out: 45 to 54, 35 to 44, 25 to 34, that we'll get to. So we are now going to an age-based system with 11 essential health indicators, which means if we open it up to 65 to 74, that now can receive the vaccine, and let's say we do that at the very first of March 1st, those that are 65 to 74, or sorry, 65 to 70 or 69 can now receive the vaccine. However, if there is somebody within the age groups of 16 to 54 that has 2 health conditions, for example, have diabetes or have a heart condition, they could fall in and receive the vaccine earlier, because we know that they are at a higher risk. So we are going to an age-based system. and we are also including health conditions. And that information actually will go out through a number of public information sites, websites. We work with our PIO so that hopefully Utahns will understand and be notified as we move through these age groups. So that's kind of the timeline. I would think that all of Utahns actually will be before July. They can receive it. We're hoping that that timeline might be more looking at a May timeframe where all of Utahns can receive the vaccine. But it's got to be that we have enough vaccine that we can vaccinate the populations as we move through. So I will end there and open it up if there's any questions or comments. And thank you for your time.
Well, thank you, Rich. In the Q&A, there's a couple questions. If you want to click on that, just quickly, Rich. Wayne Peterson talks about points of distribution and pandemic medication dispensing forms have been kind of the historic place for vaccination. Are they being ignored during this COVID-19 pandemic?
So in our first phase, the vaccine went to non-hospital healthcare workers. So we sent the vaccine to our health systems and had them vaccinate healthcare workers within their hospitals. That's continuing with the second dose. And our next phase, the highest throughput of vaccination is through our local health departments. And our local health departments can do 1,000 a day, which means that's the minimum we are requesting as we move through this response. So what that will mean will be that our local health departments, community nursing services, and then we are also working with Intermountain and University of Utah on certain sites that have at least a minimum of 1,000 a day in which they can vaccinate. And those will be our dispensing sites as we move forward. As we move into a later phase in that May, June, July timeframe, then by that point, we will have pharmacies on board. We will have other physicians. We will have other clinics that can receive vaccine from us. And then you can go to your local pharmacy, or you can go to like your private physician to receive vaccine.
Great. Another question deals with, and I think that this was addressed during the press conference today, but are there any plans to change or add methods by which 70 and over can schedule a vaccine? They talked in the press conference that they've realized since they've opened, number one, is demand just is overwhelming systems. And number two, they found out that some of the people 70 and over have a tough time with the technology. That, for instance, they might not have an email address, and some of those are requiring an email address. Can you address what they're trying to do to help make those a little easier for those people? Yeah.
So again, this is at the local health department level where these vaccinations are occurring and these appointments are occurring. So those over the 70 that can navigate and make appointments online, is the preferred method. But we know that most of them will call the phone lines to make appointments. So many of the local health departments will take appointments by phone, but we know that the phone lines are also being overburdened. So there's going to have to be some patience with that population as we move through that. And it's also advised that, if you have family members that are over the age of 70, for example, my mom and dad are over the 85, that we should step up and assist them. So use your family members to help assist and whether or not they can schedule those appointments online or to make a call. Most of the digital media or the public information that goes out is for that population is on TV and radio. It's not like on Facebook and Instagram and some of these other instant messaging, these platforms. They're on different platforms, and we're reaching out to that population based on what they would be more likely to watch, like Wheel of Fortune time, et cetera, are some examples.
Okay. Also, I understand that if people have tested positive for COVID, that at least for 90 days, you're asking them to not get in the queue and be vaccinated. Is that correct?
That's correct, because
They don't need the vaccine, basically.
Well, they don't need the vaccine except for about after 90 days. We are starting to see reinfection after 90 days, and that's why it's recommended that after 90 days of infection, then we are recommending that you do get the vaccine.
And so if you're 70 and over and you've had it, and then if you just got over it, you should wait 3 months, and there won't be a problem if they're now doing people 45 to 55 for you to be able to still just be able to get in the queue and get vaccinated, right?
That's correct. So when we go through those age priority groups, it doesn't mean that that's specific to those age categories. If there's anybody that was missed above those age categories, they can always get in to get vaccinated.
And is there any talk of making vaccination mandatory?
No, there's no, at least at the state level, there is no recommendations to make it mandatory. That would be more at if a business would like to make it mandatory, that's really up to that business and how they would perform that action.
And just one question from Scott Darrington. What are you hearing from AstraZeneca and Johnson & Johnson? Do you know when they may be coming online?
So the earliest I've heard possibly about Johnson & Johnson, and I don't know about AstraZeneca right now, but Johnson & Johnson, they may put in their EUA sometime in February.
And so maybe by March, we'll be able to start rolling those out or something, some timeline, something like that.
Yeah, it could be by March when that would roll out.
Okay.
Rich, I have a question. This is Susan here. Are there any verification measures in place presently for those who are showing up for the vaccine to make sure they're making the appointment at the right time?
So some of the local health departments may ask for ID with that 70 and above. But when we get to the other age groups, so let's say we move down the category, especially when we get into if you have a risk, for example, if you have heart disease, we're hoping that people are honest about it and realize that, if for myself, who I'm 54, have no health conditions, I wouldn't go in there and say that I got heart disease so I can get vaccinated earlier. We're really relying on people to be honest about that. We're not going to ask for some verification of a health condition within an age group to ensure. It's just about personal honesty at that point.
And Rich, what about the risk our first responders face in our cities and towns? I realize there's no priority status anymore, but teachers were also in that same situation where they're dealing a lot with the public, teachers especially with younger children, but first responders are facing all elements of the population.
Yeah, so they're actually have already started to get vaccinated weeks ago.
Okay, thank you.
So yeah, they're included even before this 70 plus age group that we've started on.
Thank you, Rich.
So Rich, one more question is, Catherine Newman, if we are prioritizing funding, in what way should we use those funds to facilitate vaccinations? Is it education for phasing? Is it distribution or cost for kits? Or is it possible to allocate funding for buying additional solutions? Kind of a multifaceted question there.
I'm not quite sure I understand how the funding would work. If you could clarify. I'm not sure what the question is.
I'm not really sure either. Catherine, you want to kind of explain that? Well, I ask Rich, on this town hall is a bunch of elected officials, city administrator people. What can we do to best help the efforts as far as vaccination goes with to enhance the efforts at the state of Utah?
Well, so again, we work with our local health departments, and I think as we receive more vaccine and start to expand out to other high throughput sites, it may be of interest that the local health departments may have to work with local officials to use particular, certain sites for mass vaccination clinics that may be utilized. So like, I know that Intermountain has sites, University of Utah has some sites, but we also have a contractor that may need to use some sites within a particular city or a county that we can send vaccine to them and they can, open up a mass vaccination site within a particular city. But again, that most of that is coordinated with the local health departments.
Okay, one of the things that I might suggest that we do as elected officials and administrative officials with cities is coordinate with your health department. Make sure that people are understanding how to get a hold of them, what their phone number is, what their website is, and those kind of things with our city newsletters to make sure that that gets out and we're able to handle that. So Catherine followed up and said the region has given millions of dollars to allocate toward vaccination or other options to support the pandemic. If we're prioritized funding, what is the best use of those funds?
So we have received state funds and federal funds for this response, and we are allocating those funds to our local health departments, community nursing services. We are keeping some of those within the state to enhance our registry to ensure that we have good data. But at a local level, I'm not sure how those funds would be helpful. I mean, there may be, maybe the local health departments in some way, to help pay for their staff. We're trying to give local health departments as much money as possible to pay for their staff in these hours and hours and hours that they're doing for vaccination. And perhaps that may be a coordination between local health departments and county officials.
Yeah, and we want them to run out of vaccine every week, don't we? I mean, that's really the goal. So, okay, Rich, thank you so much for taking the time to meet with us, and I so appreciate it. The next, our next guest is Kelvyn Cullimore. Kelvyn is the president and CEO of BioUtah, which is an independent trade association serving the life science community in the state of Utah. You may know Kelvyn as the former mayor of city of, I think, Cottonwood Heights. Is that correct, Mayor? A city of Cottonwood Heights, and just more importantly than that, I think he was my boss and is a good friend. And Kelvyn will introduce the rest of the program. So, Mayor Cullimore, time's yours.
Thank you, John. In fact, John made it sound like I was his boss. John was the city manager, and I'm the mayor. And as you know, mayors are powerless, right? The city managers do all the work. So I appreciate John putting me on the program today. Many of you may know that we have a very vibrant life science community in the state of Utah. We are the fastest growing life science community in the country since 2012 based on job growth. And so many of you have these kinds of facilities that manufacture drugs, devices, diagnostics in your communities. We have clusters in St. George, Logan, and all along the Wasatch Front. We've been very reactive to the COVID-19 situation. We have over 50 companies manufacturing products or doing testing, responding to that. 6 companies that manufacture COVID-19 tests, including Spectrum Solutions and Draper, who were the ones that invented the saliva test for COVID-19. So Utah is very much on the map when it comes to doing that kind of testing. And we are affiliates with national associations. And today I'm very pleased to introduce Dana Malick, who is the Deputy Vice President of State Advocacy for PhRma. PhRma is a trade association at a national level that represents the large companies like Johnson & Johnson and AstraZeneca and Moderna and Pfizer, many of whom are also members of BioUtah. And she covers the Rocky Mountain region, which includes Utah, Colorado, Kansas, Wyoming. And in her role, she oversees all of PhRma's state legislative efforts in the region, working to ensure patients have access to the medicines they need and advocating for policies that allow the biopharmaceutical industry to successfully innovate and find new treatments and cures. Prior to her current role, Dana served as PhRma's Senior Policy Director for the region, and before coming to PhRma, Dana spent over a decade doing advocacy and government affairs work for the American Cancer Society Cancer Action Network. So Dana is extremely knowledgeable in this area, and today is going to talk to us a little bit about the vaccines and the safety of vaccines. We talk about what we can do as city leaders to help. One of the things we can do is help educate our citizens about the process by which they can get vaccinated and the safety, and refer them to sites that can inform them about the vaccines, et cetera. So Dana, if you'd like to unmute yourself, and we will turn the time over to you.
Thank you so much, Kelvyn. And thank you, John, and Rich. Really, thank you for the presentation today as well. It's just really fascinating to kind of learn about each state's distribution plan for vaccines, because as everyone knows, there was sort of general guidance that came from the CDC, but each state is really kind of having to figure this out. So just thank you, Rich, for your work in that space. And Kelvyn, thank you for the introduction. I really love working in partnership with you and BioUtah on all things related to industry in the state. And just thank you for your partnership. Thank you. I'm thrilled to be here today. Just wanted to thank the Utah League of Cities and Towns for including us in this discussion. I think, generally today, I kind of want to go through some of the treetops around the vaccines that are on the table right now, 2 of which have been FDA approved and a couple of which are looking at perhaps an emergency use authorization on the horizon. And kind of the process that was followed and the safety protocols that were followed in order to get these vaccine candidates across the finish line. And then I'll also kind of get into some of the work that PhRma has done over the last 6 months or so to really identify issues with vaccine confidence, specifically with COVID-19 vaccine confidence, because as all of you are such critical players in making sure that communities are educated about the safety of the COVID-19 vaccine so that they're amenable to taking it. Because obviously we've had great successes in getting these products approved. But we need people to take them. So kind of equally as important as educating about their safety. So I will start here sharing my screen. Is my slide up? I just want to double check, make sure. Okay, perfect.
Your slide is up, Dana, but it's not full screen. So,
okay, let's see if I can.
Perfect. Okay. There you go.
Perfect. Okay, great. Technology wins today. So I first just kind of want to get into our industry's commitment to beat coronavirus. When the pandemic was declared in March 2020, which seems like a lifetime ago, very proud to say that PhRma was well underway in kind of several key areas to respond to the pandemic. We have more than 35 biopharma companies as members, and more than half of them are working in the space of vaccine or treatment for COVID-19. So I'm really proud of that fact and how quickly companies really kind of scanned their libraries of medicine and research that already existed in order to determine what they had that might be applicable to fighting coronavirus when it first kind of descended on the US. So all hands on deck was sort of our motto when February and March came rolling around last year. And we really kind of looked at all the resources that companies had to see kind of what our broad array of tools were to combat the pandemic. And I think in a very unprecedented time, companies were sharing clinical trials data with existing compounds and molecules in real time. So, this is typically an industry that's well known for being competitive. And I think this was a time in which companies actually did the opposite and were talking to each other. Countries were talking to each other and really sharing information to come up with interventions for COVID-19 in the quickest way possible. We also, as an industry, expanded our manufacturing capacity to address the pandemic. So as Kelvyn mentioned, this was taking place in Utah and across the country, really, where companies halted manufacturing processes of other medications in order to ensure that we could have a quick enough uptake in manufacturing, testing, and treatment, and also vaccine interventions for COVID-19. And we'll talk a little bit more about that. But particularly in the vaccine space, companies really shifted to manufacturing vaccines prior to any FDA approval, so as to really be ready to distribute those vaccines the second that the FDA granted emergency use authorization. Of course, there's a risk assumed in that space because if they're not approved by the FDA, they can't be distributed. But companies really felt that was a risk worth taking in order to be ready to distribute should approval take place. We collaborated with foreign governments like the Chinese Medical Association and other foreign governments to donate supplies and medicines around the world. And we worked with Operation Warp Speed, of course, to ensure that, and we also worked with the World Health Organization to ensure that medicines are affordable and accessible. So our industry has a very strong commitment to ensuring that vaccines are safe and effective. And I'll get a little bit more into this later, but obviously there's a lot of public concern over the speed at which these medicines came to market, particularly the vaccines and a couple of different treatment interventions that seem to come to market quite quickly when typically it takes quite some time for a drug to be approved. So we did have 9 of our CEOs of member companies of pharmas come out and publicly pledge to ensure that vaccines and treatments for COVID-19 were affordable, pledged to work with private and public payers to make sure that that cost is not an issue when folks go to get the vaccine. And in the midst of one of the most contentious presidential races, as I think we can all agree, our industry leadership really tried to ensure publicly that we were going to stick to the science. And by that, we mean that no corners were going to be cut prior to the election or after the election. That was not going to determine timing of any of these COVID-19 interventions moving forward in the scientific process and in the approval process by the FDA. And then we also worked with other supply chain stakeholders, so distributors, insurers, hospitals, pharmacies, to develop principles for a safe and effective access to a vaccine. So in addition, this was sort of an unprecedented shift from industry, but we really also recognized that we needed to ensure that those enrolling in clinical trials generally, but specifically in the clinical trials for COVID-19 vaccines, encompassed a diverse group of enrollees. So from all backgrounds, ethnicities, et cetera. I'll get into this a little bit later in my presentation, but people really wanted to know that the vaccine clinical trials were being tested on people who looked like them. And so this was important for the purposes of public perception and public trust in the vaccine, should it actually be approved. But in addition to that, as we all know, really the pandemic has disproportionately impacted communities of color. And the numbers continue to show that. And so we really wanted to ensure that the communities and the populations who have been so deeply affected by the virus would respond to the vaccine in a way equal to all members of the population that were tested. So really in November of 2020, PhRma released the first ever industry-wide principles on clinical trial diversity, which kind of represent an important step towards greater health equity in general. And the principles focus on 4 main areas: building trust and acknowledging the historic mistrust of clinical trials within the Black and Brown communities, reducing barriers to clinical trial access, using real world data to enhance information on diverse populations beyond product approval, so beyond FDA approval, and then enhancing information about diversity and inclusion in clinical trial participation for the public. And more information about our clinical trial principles can be found on PhRma's website, and I'm happy to send that after this presentation. So where are we? These numbers change every day, frankly, weekly. And I think they're pretty darn good numbers given, so we've got, over 1,700 clinical trials in play at the moment, 160 investigating vaccines, and a little shy of 1,600 investigating therapies, which is extremely impressive. And we need those numbers because a typical vaccine takes 7 years to come to market, 95% failure rate. So only 5% of vaccine candidates typically cross the finish line, which means we need this many shots on goal in order to get, 1 or 2 or 3, as we're seeing, approved and actually available for use. So this has been an extraordinary effort to really kind of, as I mentioned, put all hands on deck in testing every idea out there that may work in either a vaccination space or in a treatment space. I'll just mention a couple of others. So the treatment space is alongside the vaccine effort, extremely important. We've had some successes there as well. I'm sure the name remdesivir is one that you've all heard, but that's an intervention that is meant to keep patients who are infected with COVID-19 from progressing to the point where they need a ventilator for support and breathing. And so not only is that, from a person's quality of life and weathering the disease, a huge deal, but it also is a huge cost savings when it comes to hospitalization for those that get the disease. They're typically out of the hospital 5 days earlier, absent remdesivir in clinical trial populations. And then there are other interventions related to antibodies that are really meant to keep those who are infected with the disease from having it progress to the point where they ever have to go to the hospital. So things like that have been equally as important in combating the virus, and our companies have been hard at work in those spaces as well. So safety and efficacy of vaccines is a huge priority for us, as I mentioned, and I think there are some main points that we like to emphasize, and I'll get a bit more into this in terms of what we found in our vaccine messaging research as well. But really, kind of 4 key points that I've outlined here in talking about the safety and efficacy of vaccines. So there were no shortcuts taken in developing these treatments and vaccines, period. And in fact, there were actually some extra layers of scrutiny added to the approval process for a vaccine candidate to get emergency use authorization approval. So even, a couple more hoops to jump through to really ensure that these vaccines were safe for use in a broader population. Our companies are committed to the FDA's gold standard review requirements. And in fact, our companies pledged not even to submit to the FDA until phase 3 data was complete, which is not always the case. So sometimes a submission for approval, the FDA for emergency use authorization will occur before phase 3 data is actually complete. And companies decided to wait on that because they really wanted a larger pool of enrollees in the clinical trials to have been exposed to the virus to ensure that those who were not given placebo and given active vaccine actually responded in a way that was positive and showed that they had immunity. And our companies welcomed, so the third point is our companies welcomed additional guidance from the FDA on vaccine development. So we really did work hand in glove with the FDA. And finally, we'll continue to monitor safety following authorization. There's typically a period of 24 months where companies closely monitor enrollees in the clinical trial to look at side effects that may occur in a longer term and really look at how long that immunity lasts. So very close observation occurring there long after enrollees are having the vaccine administered. So just to kind of give you a quick shot of where we are in the vaccine pipeline. So as was mentioned, the vaccine candidates from Pfizer, BioNTech, and Moderna have been approved by the FDA, and they are currently dispersed to states to be given to general population, as is determined by the states, as Rich laid out earlier. And then we have a couple of other vaccine candidates in phase 3 trial. And I think the two of most, particular note at this moment in time are the Johnson & Johnson and AstraZeneca Oxford vaccine candidates. As was mentioned, it does look like Johnson & Johnson and probably AstraZeneca will both look at submission for emergency use authorization in the coming month or two. And, I think I've gotten the question before, well, why don't we just have one vaccine and everybody be all hands on deck and just manufacturing that one so that we have enough vaccine for everybody. And frankly, we don't have the manufacturing capacity to make that kind of make sense. But additionally, I think it's really important to note that the vaccines are different from one another. And so, for instance, even between the Pfizer and the Mrna vaccine, they are both what's called an mRNA vaccine, which I'll get into a little bit. But they require different storage temperatures. And the Pfizer vaccine requires a much colder storage temperature, which makes obviously the storage of it a bit more difficult and challenging in some cases. And so it was good to kind of have both options, one of which required different, less rigorous storage temperatures or less cold storage temperatures. And then the Johnson & Johnson vaccine is not an mRNA vaccine at all and can be stored at regular temperatures. And so I think just understanding that because they differ from one another, there are advantages to each of them that can be useful if they're all available for use. And then this is just a sort of a quick snapshot of kind of the initial process for vaccine distribution. And I won't get into the details, but obviously, kind of some important points to make here, as I've mentioned, is that, manufacturers of these vaccines were actually making the products prior to FDA approval. So that put us at a significant advantage when FDA approval was granted because the vaccines were ready to get out the door to states the next, as opposed to waiting for approval and then going through the manufacturing process, which could have added months, if not longer, to those vaccines making their way to states. And then, as was mentioned, initially, it was essentially the CDC, or essentially an entity that's under the jurisdiction of the CDC, the Advisory Committee on Immunization Practices, sort of created the original guideposts for who should get the vaccine first, sort of what should the prioritization populations be. There was input from the National Academy of Science as well in that process. And then it kind of went to the states to use those guardrails and determine really what made the most sense for their unique populations in terms of distribution protocol. And then you can kind of see the different entities that become a part of the process in getting vaccines to the states. And then kind of alongside that is, as I mentioned, the post-approval monitoring from companies to look at side effects and additional safety attributes of the vaccine. So there have been state challenges pertaining to logistics. I think some states have struggled more than others. A lot of different sort of attributes as to of creating that problem, those problems. But I think it's just important to remember, frankly, that we haven't in recent history had the job of vaccinating the volume of people that we do in response to this pandemic. And so it really is unprecedented in our modern time to have to vaccinate this many people this quickly. And so it's, we're learning as we go, and the collective we is everyone in the states really working tirelessly to do this in the best way that they can, not really having a roadmap in recent history. So I think hopefully as we learn more as we go, there will, kind of correct some of these challenges along the way. So this kind of gets us to, it's a really wonderful sort of extraordinary thing that we have 2 vaccines now approved by the FDA and being used. Great. However, given the politicization of the vaccine and the pandemic in general, mainstream media, so many facts out there because of social media, and the speed at which these vaccine candidates came to market, I think all of that created the perfect storm for the public to have an increased level of skepticism and concern around whether or not these vaccines are actually safe. And that, of course, impacts somebody's willingness to get it. And we need people to take the vaccine in order to, to get our world back to normal, or to some level of new normal, but at least one where we can all see each other again in person, and certainly get our state and national and global economies back to a place of stability. So PhRma kind of recognized that this would be an issue, acknowledging that there is an anti-vaccine effort underway in this country, and probably more so in certain states, that would probably latch on to the skepticism that they knew would be in place around the COVID vaccine. So we did some polling and focus groups over the last 6 months or so to really kind of get at the core of people's concerns around the COVID vaccine, and kind of use that information to develop messaging that moved those who are skeptical to a place of higher confidence in the safety of the vaccine, and therefore increase their willingness to take it, which is the objective. So I just wanted to share some of that research with you. I can send some additional follow-up information, but we are working with partners like the Partnership to Fight Infectious Disease through a campaign called Vaccination, which I can send more information on, Vaxa Capital Nation. And then we've been working with Research America and groups like the National Governors Association to really kind of get these messages into the hands of the messengers that can tell the story most effectively. So I think generally I'll kind of go through, I've seen state polls on vaccine confidence, and obviously I've seen our own national data, and there's a lot of similarities no matter what subpopulation or population you're looking at. Generally speaking, when you're looking at the whole pie, there are specific groups that tend to have higher levels of their population or their demographic that are skeptical about the vaccines being safe. So these are communities of color, conservatives, and those of lower income levels. And so I think we acknowledge that there are certain subgroups that are less comfortable taking the vaccine than others, and they each have their unique reasons as to why that is. Historically, there's a distrust of vaccines and the vaccination process among Black and Brown communities, as we know. And so I think there are unique ways in which we talk to members of those communities about the vaccine safety piece, as well as other demographics. So this is sort of the public perception as a snapshot that we found from our research. There's sort of a wait and see mentality. People really want to kind of see, well, let those other people take it first. And if it ends well for them, then maybe we'll go ahead. And that's sort of regardless of whether or not populations of people are able to get the vaccine at this time. I think nobody really wants to be first. Fear of the unknown, kind of three typical primary questions around it, as I mentioned. The speed at which it was developed, kind of this is a new disease altogether. Kind of the perception there's a lot about COVID-19 that we don't know. And so how can we be so sure about the interventions for it? And then what are the side effects? Because obviously, even for those individuals who have taken the vaccine, it's only sort of been in their system for, some of the clinical trial enrollees, I would say, 6 months or so, if not a little less. And so, a fear about kind of side effects that may have not surfaced yet in those who have taken the vaccine. So the most effective messaging to sort of combat these concerns focus on lives saved, the scope of clinical trials, the presence of technological advances and research that we had in our arsenal before COVID-19 even hit that we were able to use to combat it. And then kind of explaining through the fact that this was not a rushed process to approve. It was a combination of a lot of sort of unprecedented behaviors that allowed us to approve vaccines in such a quick manner. So what do voters want to know more about? And again, these are national numbers, but we found them to coincide kind of at the state level accurately as well. As people want to know more about safety and side effects. They want to know more about what vaccines and treatments are in the pipeline. They want to know more about how they can get a COVID-19 vaccine once it's approved. And they want to know how we're working with insurers to make sure that cost is not a barrier to getting the vaccine. And then there are a whole host of other things that are of interest to the public as well. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the specific messages that really resonate with people who are skeptical to make them feel less skeptical, but the messenger is equally as important, right? So obviously this shouldn't come as a surprise. I think in speaking to all of you who have great relationships in your communities, and you really do have your finger on the pulse of the concerns your own communities have, I think it's safe to say that often you as representatives for your communities will be great partners with medical professionals, pharmacists, primary care providers in your communities to kind of give these messages and be armed with these messages for those constituents you have that are skeptical. So I think it's, looking to partner with these entities that are really trusted with the public to talk about why vaccines are safe and why they're safe to get and that people should get them. So how do we, what's the guide rail, or what's the kind of the main points to emphasize if you are in your community and you're talking to a constituent that is really skeptical about getting the vaccine? So again, and I will mention too that I'm going to send a follow-up sort of toolkit, which really gets into these 4 points and then has supporting points even beneath them if somebody is pushing you further on more information, so that you really are armed with how to respond to questions that your communities have around the safety of a vaccine. But generally speaking, if you have 30 seconds, which is sometimes the case, really to reinforce, historically, vaccines have saved millions of lives, to reference smallpox, measles, polio. We have the historical data to show that these vaccines work and that they work without having, adverse side effects that have done more harm than good. Emphasize that the vaccine development process was rigorous, as I've mentioned. Underscore the massive scope of clinical trials. So, for example, the Pfizer clinical trial had upwards of 40,000 enrollees. And this is a really huge number. And because of this very large number, we were able to ensure that half of that population, so 20,000 people, actually got the vaccine. That allows us to look at a much larger pool of people to determine if the vaccine is effective. Smaller numbers in clinical trials really then result in it taking a lot longer to evaluate, because you can't expose people proactively to the virus. They have to be exposed just through their normal course of living life. And so the more people you have, the more exposure you have. And that allows you to have a larger pool of people exposed and showing immunity. And I think that's really kind of how we were able to speed up the process on one front. So I think the number of people in the clinical trials is an important point to make. And then again, those clinical trials, the enrollees in clinical trials, not only were a lot of people, but they were from all diverse backgrounds. And people really want to know that there were enrollees in these clinical trials that looked like them. And so I think that's an important point to make as well. And then people are looking now to medical professionals and experts to kind of provide this information and kind of ground the message around the vaccine in science. And so it's really important to partner with, local public health professionals and medical professionals to deliver these messages to those who are worried about the vaccine safety. And then I won't get into these specifics, but in the toolkit that I'll send as a follow-up, we really kind of get into the main, piece that I think requires a bit more detail for those that are truly concerned about the speed at which these vaccines cross the finish line. A lot has been said about why that is. And I think when most people, a lot of people, I should say, get their information from social media and, maybe not from particularly reliable sources, I think it's important that we address the speed at which vaccines came to market, and that it was a combination of a lot of different factors that were unprecedented. And so you'll have this information as well to really kind of get into the question around what I do think that once people better understand why it only took, 12 months or 11 months, they feel better about the safety piece. And then we'll also, I've included some information about the mRNA vaccine specifically because they're sort of the first of its kind, and both the Moderna and Pfizer vaccines are mRNA vaccines. And I think there's a lot of questions around what that is. Typically, when people think about a vaccine, they think about injecting a live virus into the body and sort of having that then fight off or trigger the body's immune system to fight off the real virus. And mRNA is different from that. So this sort of is just a couple of points that give a distinction to the mRNA vaccine and help kind of debunk some misconceptions about it. And so this will kind of help give you some guide rails of how to answer questions about the mRNA vaccine specifically. So again, we're really working hard on not only ensuring that our individual companies are working hard ensuring that vaccines and treatments for COVID-19 are safely going through the approval process. But we're also wanting to make sure that once these interventions cross the finish line, people feel confident in their safety to take them. So, as the trade association, we really want to be a good partner with BioUtah, with you all in giving you what you need to talk effectively about the COVID-19 interventions out there, specifically the vaccines, so that people feel confident in going and taking them. And so if there are questions that you're hearing from your constituents, from your communities about the vaccine or the treatments that we've not included in some of these talking points, and you can take a look at the toolkit I send also. We really want to know about it. I think we want to make sure that you can answer questions so that people feel confident about these interventions. And so obviously we're hearing new things, new concerns all the time. So I really, and we want to be a good partner. Please, be in touch with us through Kelvyn and John to kind of tell us what you're hearing. And we'll really kind of look to see, what data we have to address the concerns that you're hearing. And with that, I will wrap up. PhRma.org/coronavirus is sort of where our clearinghouse of information is on the pandemic and our response. And I just, again, appreciate your time so much today, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Dana, thank you. One thing I would point out from Dana's presentation, she had a slide that talked about all of the companies that have vaccines in the works. It's important to note that the schedule that the state of Utah has put out only counts on the Pfizer and Moderna vaccines. If Johnson & Johnson's vaccine or AstraZeneca or any of the others come through, that will accelerate the availability of vaccines and accelerate the path for getting vaccines more rapidly than what the current schedule shows from the state of Utah. So we're excited about what our companies are doing because there's several that are working on vaccines, as she's shown here, that are in phase 3 already. And as those come online in the next month or 60 days, that will do a lot to accelerate the process by which the vaccines become available. So John, I just want to make that point. We'll turn the time back to you. It looks like we're out of time, but if there are questions that come up later, we're happy to respond to them. Or if people have further inquiries, they can certainly get a hold of me or you.
Well, thank you. Dana, let me ask one question, either Kelvyn or Dana. We know that the mRNA vaccine by Pfizer, BioNTech, and Moderna is, it's really been in only development in probably the last 10 years and mainly for cancer research. But the fact that they are able to turn around this vaccine in 10 or 11 months, I think what I sense is that is something that will, even though it's revolutionary to us today, that as we go down the road and maybe we have other issues dealing with other viruses, that this handful of different technologies that are out there probably could replicate this kind of response, hopefully in the future. I mean, I just think that this is not just a big day for our fight on this virus, but probably this technology is a big day for fights on all kinds of health issues. Is that correct?
Well, I mean, I think you're right in the sense that when the industry took a collective look at each individual company's arsenal and sort of library of what they had in the works, and then we're able to kind of communicate with each other about that. Yeah, we kind of realized that we're in a space where we have perhaps the potential to do this in other disease states. But, I will say, we've always said that in this industry, science really builds upon itself. And that's why even past failures, while they can be costly at times, they turn out to be very valuable in spaces that are unknown to us at the time. So for example, remdesivir, which has really been an effective treatment, as I mentioned, for those infected with COVID that advances to a serious stage, that was originally tested in Ebola patients and was not effective. And so Moderna has yet to have any FDA approved products except for this vaccine. And so, I think when you really look at what companies have used these successful interventions on prior to and have not been successful, they've been able to kind of look and see, well, maybe it'll work in this space. And that's really what happens in our industry. We have a lot of failures, but those failures are built upon to find success in unexpected spaces. So we expect that certainly to continue.
Okay, thank you. And if anybody else, if something comes up with any of our other participants and you need us to forward questions to Dana or Kelvyn, we certainly can. And as Dana mentioned, she's going to provide Susan with a toolkit for us to use. And we will, for another reason for you to get on the website and sign up for email blast, but we'll make that available to you. So I want to thank all of our guests today, Dana and Mayor Cullimore and Rich Lakin and all of you that's participated today. So thank you very much and have a great day. Thank you again.